What does it mean for a nation to lose its soul? Some say it happens quietly, without thunder or warning, when ideals are betrayed not by enemies, but by those who claim to defend them. Others say it happens all at once, in a single act so heavy with moral consequence that it can never be undone. In the spring of 1782, the American Revolution was nearing its end. The new republic to be had endured 7 years of hardship and sacrifice. The word freedom had become almost sacred, the measure of everything that justified the cost. And yet, in the shadow of that word, a small event unfolded in the Ohio wilderness that stripped it of its purity. It did not happen on a battlefield or between rival armies. It happened in a quiet village called Gnadenhutten, home to native families who had already laid down their weapons and placed their trust in peace. They were Lenape, converts to Christianity, who believed that the teachings they had adopted, the same moral code that guided many of their colonizers, might finally grant them safety. What followed instead was betrayal so deep that its echo still reaches across centuries. The story of Gnadenhutten is not merely a tale of violence or loss. It is a mirror held up to the founding of a nation, showing the shadow behind its light. And it begins, as so many American stories do, with faith. Faith that good intentions would be enough to survive the storm. Before the guns of the Revolution reached the Ohio country, the Moravian Lenape had already been living in a fragile balance between two worlds. The Lenape people were among the first to face the oncoming tide of European settlement in the East. Once spread across the Delaware River Valley, they had watched as waves of colonists claimed their lands through treaties written in languages few of them could read. As pressure mounted, many moved westward into the interior, toward the forests and rivers that promised distance from colonial conflict. It was there that they encountered the Moravian missionaries, pacifists from Germany who preached simplicity, humility, and above all, peace. Together, they built small communities where native life met European faith, where fields replaced fortresses, and where sermons echoed through longhouses. Gnadenhutten, Schönbrunn, and Salem became experiments in coexistence. They had gardens, schools, and hymns sung in Lenape and German alike. The missionaries refused to take sides in the revolution, teaching that no earthly power was worth the taking of life. But neutrality is a delicate position when war consumes everything around it. To the British and their native allies, the Moravian villages looked like outposts of the rebellion. To the Americans, they looked like nests of spies serving the crown. Both sides looked upon them with suspicion. Yet still, the Moravian Lenape believed that if they lived by peace, they might be left alone. In a world fueled by vengeance, that belief was as radical as it was dangerous. By the winter of 1782, the revolution had turned the frontier into a geography of paranoia. Settlers in western Pennsylvania and Virginia lived with constant dread of raids. British agents armed and encouraged native warriors to strike isolated farms. In retaliation, militias burned villages and killed indiscriminately. Each side saw itself as victim and avenger, and in such a cycle, truth had no footing. When a few Lenape and Wyandotte raiding parties attacked frontier settlements, the outrage in Pennsylvania was instant and absolute. Few paused to ask which Lenape had taken part, or whether any of them came from the mission towns. The pain of loss overpowered the need for fact. Colonel David Williamson, a man not of cruelty by reputation, but consumed by duty and fear, gathered a militia of frontiersmen. They were farmers and fathers, men who had lost brothers and children to raids. Their goal was simple in their minds: strike back before the next attack came. But vengeance is rarely simple. It does not ask questions, and it rarely listens to conscience. To these men, any native presence near the frontier became indistinguishable from the enemy. The Moravian Lenape at Gnadenhutten, who had only recently returned from forced relocation, appeared to them not as peaceful converts, but as convenient targets for retribution. As the militia rode west through the forests, the line between justice and revenge vanished completely. When they reached the village, they found men and women harvesting what remained of their cornfields. The air was calm, the river still. But calm can be deceptive. Beneath it often lies the tension of history waiting to break. When the militia entered Gnadenhutten, they were greeted not with weapons, but with open hands. The villagers offered food and conversation, speaking in broken English and German, invoking the name of God and peace. They believed that their neutrality and their shared faith would be recognized, that the soldiers would see them for what they were: farmers, converts, people clinging to order in a chaotic world. The militia searched their homes, finding tools, hymnals, and modest possessions. To some of the soldiers, this looked like proof of innocence. To others, it was deception. In war, the mind often invents the evidence it needs to justify its fears. That night, around the campfire, the men argued. Some said they should escort the villagers east to safety, away from the borderlands. Others claimed that to do so would invite more raids, that mercy would be weakness. Williamson refused to give a direct order, perhaps sensing the weight of what was coming and trying to avoid owning it. He told his men to decide by vote. Democracy without morality is a fragile thing. The majority voted for death. And so, before dawn, conscience collapsed under the weight of fury disguised as righteousness. The villagers were confined, separated by gender, told to prepare for what lay ahead. They prayed, as they had always done, believing perhaps that their captors would relent. But vengeance, once justified, is relentless. In that moment, Gnadenhutten became not just a village doomed by misunderstanding, but a symbol of how easily humanity yields to hatred when guided by fear. When it was done, silence replaced prayer. The militia left behind ashes and absence. To them, it was over, a necessary act in a brutal war. They rode east, believing they had delivered justice, but history would remember them differently. Days later, the Moravian missionaries returned to find what had been lost. They gathered the remains, prayed over them, and marked the place with crude crosses. Their words were simple: "Here lies a people of peace." The news traveled quickly through native nations. The Moravian Lenape, who had survived elsewhere, carried the story with them, and for generations it became a parable of betrayal. Among the settlers, however, it barely registered. The Revolution's final battles near Yorktown and the diplomatic victories in Paris overshadowed all else. No official inquiry was held. No punishment was given. To the young United States, the massacre was a footnote at the margins of triumph. But for those who still lived on the frontier, the consequences were immediate. Indigenous leaders who once considered negotiation as a path forward abandoned that hope. The fragile bridges built by missionaries, interpreters, and peaceful leaders were swept away. War would come again to the Ohio country, not because of British intrigue or native ambition, but because America had shown that mercy could not be trusted. Gnadenhutten endures because it exposes a truth most nations prefer to forget: that moral loss does not always come from grand betrayals, but from the quiet decisions of ordinary people who convince themselves that cruelty is virtue. The massacre was not the work of monsters. It was the work of frightened men. That is what gives it such weight. It asks us to confront the frailty of moral conviction under pressure, to see that the boundaries between good and evil are not lines on a map, but choices made in moments of fear. For the United States, still unborn in 1782, Gnadenhutten became an invisible scar. It revealed that liberty, when bound to conquest, carries within it the seed of contradiction. How could a nation proclaim equality while treating some lives as disposable? How could faith in divine justice coexist with the extermination of those who prayed to the same God? These questions would resurface again and again, at Sand Creek, at Wounded Knee, in the boarding schools and broken treaties that followed. Every time the nation looked away from them, its moral reflection dimmed a little more. The massacre's victims became symbols not only of loss, but of endurance, the proof that even when peace is betrayed, its ideal remains indestructible in memory. And memory, though often buried, has a way of returning when silence grows too heavy to bear. To remember, Gnadenhutten is not to dwell on pain, but to confront the truth that peace is never self-sustaining. It must be chosen again and again, even when fear demands otherwise. The massacre did not end the dream of America, but it revealed the cost of forgetting the humanity of others in pursuit of safety or glory. Each generation inherits this lesson. When we celebrate the birth of a nation, we must also remember the shadows that came with that dawn. For in those shadows lie the stories of those who believed in peace and paid the price for it. Gnadenhutten stands today as a quiet field in Ohio, marked by a simple memorial. Visitors come and go, reading names carved in stone, feeling perhaps an unease they cannot quite name. That unease is history speaking, the reminder that the past is not gone, only waiting for us to listen. The day America lost its soul was not a single day at all. It was the moment it allowed righteousness to excuse cruelty. Yet the act of remembering, of telling this story, is a small step toward regaining what was lost. What did you think about today's video? Comment your thoughts and suggestions for my next video below.